All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we are talking with Nancy Napier, who is a distinguished professor at Boise State University and
Well
an author.
done. Well
Awesome.
done.
Nancy, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing really well. Thanks so much. I'm glad to be with you.
Glad to have you, and we like to jump right in. So if you could start with just telling us a little bit more about yourself and what you like to do for fun, that'd be great.
Okay. I call myself an academic entrepreneur. I have and I can tell you more if we want to get into it, but in my research, in teaching, in program development, in developing, helping to establish a business school in Vietnam, I am really good at seeing gaps and connecting dots and then building things. Once they get going, somebody else can do it. But so I think of myself as an academic entrepreneur in a number of different ways. And so that's, I guess, one way to that I introduce myself. For fun, I am really boring. I love reading. I live in a beautiful town, Boise, Idaho. We have a 25-mile long walk along a river. We live in the foothills and in the mountains. So I'm a big walker. If I had a whole lot of money, I'd go do safaris in Africa more. I absolutely love seeing these big animals that I worry may not be here in another couple of decades. And I'm an aggressive learner, I think. So right now I've sort of retired from the university. I still teach in our executive master of business program, and I do executive coaching with them, and I take that group to Vietnam every year. But I'm also trying to learn how to write fiction and play tennis. And the fiction part, I've written nonfiction forever. As a professor, I've had to. And then I got into more accessible books and things for leaders. So easier to read writing. And so I thought, hey, fiction, got to be a breeze. I've been a writer forever. It is so hard. I had no idea. So I am glad we're talking today because a month ago I was on one of those downhill sinking, thinking, what am I trying to do? This is so hard. And something changed and I've sort of picked back up. So I'm playing with it again and feeling good about it right now. So I'm a learner and I'm an academic entrepreneur. And I just like pretty simple things, like I said, reading and a lot of walking. I do have a dog, fantastic dog, and we've gotten into dog therapy. So I take her to hospitals and memory care units and hospice patients and love it. So that's also something that is total break from what I normally do, and it's a lot of fun.
I gotcha. That sounds awesome. Nice, simple, full life.
Yeah, very full.
I love it.
I've got a wonderful husband, so we do things together, and two kids in LA, and going to see them next week. So things like that are really fun.
Mm, there we go. There we go. We'll dive into the academic entrepreneur a bit more and tell us about
Okay,
some instances where the entrepreneurship side really came out in the academic world.
sure. Um, Let me think. I think I don't even remember the first time, but I started doing research as a professor, you have to, that old publish or perish thing. And I discovered fairly soon that a lot of the research people would take a topic like turnover of employees and they would write about it and study it for years and years and years. I get bored easily, so I realized I couldn't do that. And I started seeing areas, or I'd have a question from students that I didn't see in the literature. And so one of them, for example, I helped start the international business program at Boise State for undergraduate students. And one time a woman came to me and she said, well, my male professor just told me I can't do any international business overseas because I'm female. And I said, well, I've done it. If I can do it, anybody can. But that led to some research on women professionals working outside of the United States. So a colleague and I looked at women working in Japan and China and Germany and Mexico and Belgium and Vietnam. And we discovered that women actually nobody had studied women working abroad up to that point. One other person had, but all the research on expatriates was about men. And so we learned that women have some advantages, maybe some disadvantages, but actually some advantages that were fun to know about. I think because, and this happened to me early on in my career when I did some work in Japan, I was young, female, and foreign. So I had everything going against me. but that meant I stood out. And so I could actually get access to some of the senior men in companies because they were curious about what is this person, how does she operate? How does she think? And so that was one example. I guess the another one was I'm a big believer in serendipity, and I had an opportunity to go to Hanoi, Vietnam in the early 1990s to teach for 3 weeks. Vietnam was in the process of trying to learn how to do business with Western countries. They had always worked with the Soviet Union, but you may not remember, you may be too young, but in 1989, the Soviet Union fell. Boom, Vietnam is completely alone, has no trading partners, and no support. They were getting food and all kinds of things from Russia. So they had to learn how to do business with the West. And I went over and did a 3-week stint, got along with the person who was managing a project to deliver an MBA, a Master's of Business, to Vietnamese professors and business people. She and I hit it off. One thing led to another, and little Boise State University took on a project to deliver an accredited degree over there. That led to a 9-year-long project to help establish Vietnam's first international standard business school. I tell people I had brown hair when I first went to Vietnam, and you see what it did to me. I have white hair now. So I finally started telling people this project was like a new venture startup, because we were doing everything from creating academic content to helping people learn how to teach differently to learning the language of business. In those days, there was no word for management, for example, or advertising. There was no sense of what a customer was or needed. So it was helping them learn new concepts, ideas, how to teach, everything administratively from financial systems to IT systems. So it was really a new venture startup. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. So that was another kind of entrepreneurial experience. And the last one, I guess, is what I continue to be involved in. About 10 or 12 years ago, I think our dean, maybe the president of the university, said, we need to have an executive Master's of Business program. You go and develop it, said to one of my colleagues who's also very entrepreneurial. So a group of us over 2 years, designed a program quite different. We knew we couldn't compete with the big schools. People in Boise were actually flying to Chicago to go to Northwestern's program. They were going to the University of Washington in Seattle, which is a flight away. So we had to come up with a program that would be have a competitive advantage being in a remote, fairly small city. We have a lot of big companies, but out of the way. And we have developed that program. And this past year, it was rated number 15 in the country by Fortune magazine, ahead of all these big name places. So we're absolutely thrilled with that. But again, we tried something and that nobody had done because we had to. We didn't have anything really to offer in terms of a big name. I don't know if you follow football at all, but we have a football program that has become fairly well known because of creativity. And I worked with that group way back when the coach at the time said, nothing's creative. And I said, no, I keep hearing people say you are, so let's find out. So starting something like that and getting to look at creativity in organizations. Again, that was another area that really hadn't been studied when I started it. So I love finding these gaps, going after them, clearing the way, and then I get out of the way because other people are much more adept at taking things and building them. Then I can do the startup, but once it gets going, somebody else is better at it.
I gotcha.
So, yeah.
That is really cool.
Well, it's different. And, academics are not, in most universities, it's not something that that is encouraged as much. Boise State is small. It was starting, it was trying to build a name for itself. And so I think that's why they said, sure, go over to Vietnam and start a business school. I mean, where would that happen? University of Texas, probably not. So
yeah, no, for sure. Honestly, that's really cool. I like that you got to kind of flex your entrepreneurial muscles in the academic world and got to blend two passions there. But yeah, let's jump to today. What's your motivation now? What gets you up and keeps you going every day?
Again, I'd say pretty simple things. I've officially retired from the university, which basically means I don't have to go to meetings, no politics, and I don't teach undergraduates. So I'm
Nice.
teaching it only in this master's of executive master's of business administration, which means some teaching. I do coaching with some of the participants, and then we take them to Vietnam once a year. And it's not a lot. I have chunks of teaching time. I was just with them yesterday, and I'll be with them again all tomorrow afternoon. And that, frankly, is so inspiring. These are people like you. They're super smart. They're accomplished in their businesses. They're already close to the top. They just want to go from being good leaders to great leaders. And to watch that process, especially in the coaching setting, I mean, I get chills watching how they develop over the course of the program. So that is a huge, huge piece of what gets me up in the morning. And then, frankly, this fiction writing piece. As I said, it is really hard. I started out I've got 4 of the world's worst novels written. I'm trying to take a couple of them and turn them into not the world's worst, but maybe second to worst. And I lose myself completely. So I never expected that. I have, as I said, I've written for a long time, but fiction writing and nonfiction writing, you start from data, from information, from something solid, and then you try to analyze it, explain it. Fiction, oh my gosh, there's so many more things to think about. And so every time I turn around, something else comes into play, just like learning tennis. I mean, I'm thinking, how can there be 64 things you keep in your head at the same time?
Yeah,
The benefit of this, to be really honest with you, is it has forced me to be a beginner. And when I walk in a classroom now, I think, what we're talking about today, creativity, whatever it might be, this is something I've done for a long time. I've thought about it, but for these executives, it may not be. So I need to remember that they are beginners. They're really they're smart and very competent, obviously, as leaders in their companies and their organizations. But what I might be exposing them to is something new. So, Nancy, step back and remember that as a beginner, you need to explain things in a lot of different ways. You need to take things and make them meaningful to that person so that there's a way to relate the ideas that we're talking about. And so that you, Timmy, someone called you Timmy on one of the podcasts, that you can say, oh yeah, that would work in my company. I can see that. So that process of thinking about how can I turn some ideas that seem so obvious to me, but they may not be anything people know about, or they may be new. And so how do I help people understand those and not get frustrated? I
Mhm.
just was in a tennis over lunchtime. I went to a tennis clinic, which is when an instructor has several people who come. And this man, first time I've been around him, is a phenomenal teacher. And I thought, I'm going to take some of what he did today back to the classroom. I hope I do it, but he reminded me that I need to do some of it too. Whether we hit a good ball or a bad one, he would stop and he'd say, let's talk about what just happened. So to deconstruct what's going on is such a classic, wonderful teaching move. And I try to do that in classes, but I need to remember to continue to do it.
For sure.
So, yeah.
I like how it just connects to your professional life, like you being the beginner in these areas that like aren't super serious, but they're fun and they're engaging for you, connects still.
Yeah. I mean, most people love to get really good at something and then they stay in it. And I'd like to think there are a couple of things that I know a little bit about, but that notion of constantly learning something new to me is so it's inspiring, it's fun, it's hard, but I mean, why wouldn't you do it? I talked to one CEO a few years back and he said, I'm starting to hire for curiosity. So he will look for evidence that a person is curious, like you. I mean, you're asking good questions And that's huge in any kind of profession. So that ability to ask questions. And I just read something the other day, somebody famous, probably Einstein or someone, who said, if you run across a topic that is completely uninteresting to you, learn about it,
Mhm.
because that it may in fact be interesting, but it forces you to say, okay, I don't care about how candles are made, but I can ask about it, and I'll bet you I'll get excited and learn something from it if I take off on that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what you're doing here. I love you these podcasts that so many of you are doing, because you get to talk to people from all over the world who are doing really different things. How cool is that? And I mean, I would love to ask you a bunch of questions about what you learn from all of this, and how you take that and use it going forward. So good
Yeah.
for you.
Appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Are you going to give me one example, or can we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can give you a couple examples. I think the first thing I learned just from a life lessons perspective, it was one of the really early podcasts. Like back in 2021, I had a dude on, I think it was Charles Protein Mosley. I think that was his name. And I really remember his name because
Hmm.
he really stood out to me. But this guy was a crackhead.
Huh.
And then he had this really traumatic experience with his daughter where he was about to overdose and his daughter saved his life. And then he was like, I'm never going back. And now he makes like social documentaries that help homeless people because he was
Oh my
homeless
gosh.
going
Yeah.
across the country with his daughter. And
Hmm.
so that was just a testament to like really like what's possible. I think it really opened my eyes to what's possible with like a firm decision and commitment and then
Hmm.
perseverance.
Hmm.
And I think another
Great.
thing I learned, this was a recent one actually. This dude was sailing. He's a sailor. He just quit his job up and like just left his old life and was like, I'm just gonna go sail the oceans. Sold everything he had, bought a boat, went sailing after learning how to do it for a year. And he fell asleep underwater while free diving. And he didn't fall asleep. He ran out of oxygen, like he was drowning. But
Oh,
he didn't realize he was suffocating because this was so interesting to me. Apparently, when you're suffocating, it's not the lack of oxygen that is painful, it's the abundance of carbon dioxide that is
ooh.
painful. And so you have to breathe a certain way before you go free diving because if you don't breathe that way, you'll run out of carbon dioxide in your blood, so you'll never know if you're drowning or not.
Wow.
Really, really interesting. And then he was talking about how to interact with sharks as well. Like, you hold something between them and you don't act like prey because predators can sense prey. Which brings me to the third thing I've really learned from having a lot of people on the show. A lot of people who come on, they're like coaches or they're kind of like um, energy healers or they're really aware of energy in a way that people I talk to in my everyday life aren't.
Hmm.
And so I've started to read some more success literature, and success literature will always talk about energy. Like Napoleon Hill alludes to it, and then like um, Bob Proctor talks a lot about energy and like manifesting and all that stuff. And then there's the movie The Secret. So I've started to get a bit more comfortable with it, but I people come on and they start talking about it. And I think the biggest thing I realized is that we all kind of talk about it. We just may not use the words energy when we're talking about it. Like when we walk into a room and we're like, "Oh, we don't like the vibe." It's like there's an energy that you're sensing there that you're not okay with. Or somebody came on, sound healing to me sounds really like, I don't know about that. But
Hmm.
then she was like, "You do it every day. Like when you get scared and you scream, that's your body reacting to the sound and then healing itself."
Interesting. Interesting.
And so there's just these really like kind of alternative lines of thought with like energy and sound healing and meditation that I've been introduced to. And then I line it up with like scripture in the Bible because I'm Christian. I love Jesus.
Hmm.
And I'm like, it really reshaped how I saw Christianity. And I start to see scriptures that are supporting the law of attraction where I'm like, I never would have thought about that scripture that way, but I understand a bit more about what it means now. And so that's some of the stuff I've learned having
Very
people on the show.
interesting. I think there is something to the energy, and I am so naive about all of that. I just actually the other day learned about sound healing, but I mentioned to you that I do this dog therapy, and I don't know about other animals, but I think at least this dog picks up on different types of energy. And I watch her eyes. When my job when I take her out is to make sure she's safe, because all the focus is on the dog. And so we've been in a hospital or with hospice patients, where the way she interacts with them differs person to person. So some people she'll hold back and then let the person come to her, and that's fine. Other times she knows to go up, put her head on someone's thigh, to sit and listen to a person who never talks, who
Yep.
decides to sing to the dog. And so that there's so much that we just don't know, that we can't see and often dismiss. And
Yep.
so I mean, how wonderful that you're starting to learn about that. The sound healing is one that I also want to start learning about. You probably also know, or maybe know, what was the first book? There's a German, he manages forests. His name is Peter Wohlleben, which in German means well life, full life. I love that. So his name is Peter Full Life, Peter Wohlleben. And he's written a book about the hidden life of trees, was his first book. And now he has another one about walking through trees and the energy that you can get if you listen, if you watch, if you feel. And I love walking in trees, but I never really looked at them the way he does. And so all of that sort of thing, I think that's really important. We're
Hey,
probably off track here, but how interesting.
oh
Thank you.
no, no, I love that. I love that you mentioned that because um when I go walking, I'll often visualize myself absorbing energy from trees.
Huh.
And
Good.
it's something I don't tell a lot of people about because
Yeah, because who would
it's a little
understand
quirky.
it?
Yeah.
But it works. Yeah.
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 And then
You
I'll feel better.
check out this book. His first book is called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it's basically more scientific about how trees support each other as communities and communicate, as well as provide nourishment underground to one another. But this latest one, Walking in the Forest, I don't know if that's the official name, but there are a number of books out now about trees. But yeah, if it speaks to you,
Yeah.
or that's not the right word, is it? If it what is the right word? If it communicates to you some way, not in words, but in feeling and energy, I just think it's, yeah. So that's an area I need to start learning more about.
Yeah.
And see, here's serendipity, the fact that I just heard about sound healing 2 days ago, and now you're talking about that and the trees. So it all fits together in life.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Honestly. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, let's go ahead and jump into your dreams and goals. Tell us about your vision for the fiction writing, the tennis playing, the rest of your life. But also, I know you want to talk about some other dreams and goals that you've accomplished by this point in your life.
Well, I'd say the ones I've accomplished, I've mentioned to you. I have fallen into these opportunities in Vietnam and in
Hmm.
creating academic programs, and I wouldn't have said they were dreams until they started growing. So maybe I'm not goal driven enough in that regard to say this is what I want to accomplish. They unfolded. They were organic. I guess the executive MBA program, we knew we had a goal on that one. But some of these other ones are sort of, they've unfolded, and I've been able to say, oh, this looks good. Let's pursue it and build it that way. As far as going forward on the fiction writing, this is probably heresy to say, and tennis. Right now I'm doing it, I'm selfish. I'm doing it for me, and I'm doing it more for the learning and the process. So I have a very competitive tennis family, two sons who used to play a lot, one of them still does, and a husband who's always played. And about every 10 years, they'd say, Mom, you need to play tennis. So I would take lessons for 2 or 3 days. And, oh, that's fine. I'm a better cheerleader. So I've been the cheerleader all this time. And then about a year ago, I said, well, why not? And I'm doing it sort of month to month, see how it goes. And frankly, if I never play in a real match, I'm fine with that. They're all saying, oh no, you got to have an outcome. You got to, perform. You got to be competitive. I said, if I'm just having fun, if I'm learning, if it's enjoyable, if I'm meeting some nice people, I don't have any need to compete in that. Same thing with fiction. I would like people to read it, but as you, I'm sure, know in your podcasting and other work you're doing, the marketing part and finding an audience, that's hard work, and that's not the part I'm as interested in. So I will, I've written plenty of books, and none of them are New York Times bestsellers by any means, but they've helped people, some of them. And so if this is a little bit of entertainment, it's a chance for me to learn. Two of them are about topics I knew nothing about, so I get to research, which is what professors like to do. So it will, if I can get to the point where I feel comfortable that I'm able to put out a decent product and give it to some people and let them read it, and they say, I whiled away some time and got lost in it a little bit, that's fine for me right now. I don't have to support myself by my writing, thank goodness. So yeah, it's more, they are gentle dreams right now. I don't feel like they're hardcore things that I have to achieve by a certain date. These are just absolutely wonderful chances to do something new and learn
I
this point.
gotcha. That's really awesome. It's interesting because I think that's honestly the ideal way to look at life. Like, it helps you stay more engaged in the moment, and even how you talked about like dreams and goals that kind of unfolded, and you're like, oh, let's go after it. It's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Usually, people who have the trait of like really entrepreneurship are competing against something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really interesting to hear you loving this learning, loving this kind of new opportunity, and taking advantage of stuff solely for the sake of the process of learning it and doing it. Did you always have that trait, or did you develop it?
As you're saying that, what a great question. I think in this large project I did in Vietnam, in developing this executive MBA program, I don't recall feeling like we were competing with anything. There was no business school in Vietnam, so it was the first one. Now there's a lot going on, but it wasn't a competition other than, can we do the best job for this country and these people? Of course, I competing. I want to be a good teacher. I have to say, when the evaluations come back and mine are as good or better than anybody else's, I'm happy about that.
Yeah,
And I, of course, had to publish lots of academic journal articles and write books and so forth. And it wasn't necessarily a competition with other people. It was always competition with myself, for sure. I did have a set number of things I wanted to get out and publish. Early on in my career, someone said, have something under review. So when you write an academic article, you send it out to a journal and they look at it, and that can take anywhere from 3 months to a year before they read it. Then they'll send it back and say no, or they'll say change it and resubmit it. But the point was, if I always had something out there, so send out an article, send out a conference paper, always once a month. So I had something out there all the time, and I used to track it. What was out? What was the current status of it? Did they send it back? Do they want changes? Did they reject it? Okay, if they rejected it, send it somewhere else. And my hit rate early on, first 5, 6, 8 years, was about 30%. And over the course of my career later on, I didn't track it explicitly, but at one year I looked into, okay, I've sent these things out, I've published them, and my hit rate got better because I knew where to send them, which journal would be interested, and I knew better how to write, I'm sure. And I think I was hitting on topics that other people weren't by then. And so it would be something that wasn't out there competing with other people talking about the same thing. So in that vein, I mean, that's a great question, because in that vein, I think I had to learn, the book, I'm sure, The Blue Ocean,
hmm
which talks about, if you're going after markets, don't go to the ocean where the sharks are, because everybody's there and you'll get bloodied and beaten up. Go to the blue ocean where other people aren't. So that became, as I look back on it, that's what I ended up doing. And I didn't think about it ahead of time. It started to happen when I got positive response. I'd say, oh, okay, go after the areas, the blue ocean, because other people aren't doing that. So in a way, I guess that's a reverse competition. I figured out where not to go. And then I was competing with myself, but not really against other people necessarily. Coming to Boise State University, I did my PhD at Ohio State. I was at the University of Washington, and coming to a place like this, which was an experiment, came for a year and stayed for 30. This place was unknown. It was trying to grow, trying to improve. And I was lucky enough to be here at a time when I could actually help the place improve. And it's in different ways. And so that to me, that's a huge, I love that kind of thing. If you can help build the reputation of an institution or this university in Vietnam or our current participants as they are getting better in their own jobs and companies around town. I mean, why do you compete against? I don't understand competition, obviously. I'm just not, that's not me. So
Yeah, I mean, the really successful people that I'll talk to also talk about how that there's like they're not worried about competition. Like when you worry about competition, it keeps you stuck like in the shark waters. When there's a whole big ocean out there, you get stuck. Like if you're competing, you're looking at what your competitor's doing and you're trying to do it better. So it cramps creativity.
right. Good point. I
Yeah.
think you're right. I think
So
you're right.
I've heard about a lot about that, but I'm curious for those out there who are young in their career, they're just getting started in life. What would you tell them about identifying the blue oceans that they can go tackle?
I used to I used to go out and interview really successful people in their fields or places where I knew the organizations were really successful. In fact, I created what was called the gang. So forgive me if for some people that's sort of a trigger these days, I'm learning. But this was again by chance. I one summer I got interested in organizational creativity. There is tons on individual creativity, math people and scientists and artists, but not a whole lot on how organizations do it. So I started interviewing people at a really successful little software company and at a very successful Shakespeare theater firm company here that Yale Drama School has written about them and so forth. So they're very well regarded. And then I stumbled into the Boise State football program. And what I discovered was that these places all approach creativity in similar ways. I mean, they're different tweaks, but they looked at creativity even when they didn't know they were being creative. And they did it oddly in similar ways. That led to creating over time a gang of really diverse CEOs, top leaders in organizations from healthcare and education, sports. We had the jail, the Ada County Sheriff's Office, so jail and police in that group. And it turned out, I started and was lucky to start with 3 really good ones, but then built this group of high performing, however you measure it in your field, organizations and highly creative organizations. And they became a group, did a couple of books on them from the lessons from them. And so let's see, over time, well, I ended up having maybe 7 of these different gangs, but they talk to each other in ways that they couldn't talk to anybody else. So they were the top people in their organizations. They couldn't go to their board of directors with some questions and issues they had. They couldn't talk to their subordinates. And they had no axe to grind and no agenda across who they were. And so the lesson to me there was, and they learned from each other. They talked about culture and leadership and recruiting and all kinds of things that turned out they had similarities. My lesson from that was, and then for younger people, back to what we were talking about earlier, what are you curious about? What is it that you can maintain your passion on for a few years? And then find out from the best people what's going on, and then figure out what's not. So it's, in a way, it was like multiple Venn diagrams. So I found out there were lots of people studying as scholars certain things, but on the edges, there were things that I was interested in that I couldn't find anybody doing. And some people would say, well, if nobody's doing it, it must not be a market for any interest in that. or why would you do it if nobody else is looking at it? And I guess I never really formally thought about it that way. I just thought, I'm interested. I want to learn more about it. And so I was, again, fortunate enough to live in a town that was small, and they would let professors in the door. So I could get in the door of anybody in town. We had a lot of Fortune 500 companies here. We had our cover. A lot of people say we're like Austin used to be.
Mhm.
And we may be like Austin, we're growing so fast, but the access to these people, they would let a professor in the door, and I just asked questions. And so I started finding areas that I was interested in, that I wanted to build up. And so that's one thing. And I think it's trite to say, but I would say take risks. If it doesn't, my philosophy is the one thing you can't undo is having children. You can unmarry, you can move, you can change jobs, but there's so many times that we won't take a step or risk, even small ones, because we're afraid of what others will think, or what we might think of ourselves if we fail. And I'm sure we learn more when we make mistakes, when we fail. And so if you don't take a risk, you're not going to fail. And if you learn, well, there are plenty of people now who say fail fast, fail early, fail fast, and you'll get better. And I think that's all really true. So I guess my advice would be, find something, and this sounds, again, sort of like a graduation speech. It's not finding your bliss, but it's finding something serious that you're interested in and curious about and can keep your interest for a while. In the academic world, I don't know if this is true for other people, but I changed in a significant way the topics for my research about every 5 to 7 years. So I looked at human resource management and strategy. I looked at mergers and acquisitions. I looked at women working abroad. I looked at emerging economies like Vietnam. I looked at creativity in organizations. What do they have in common? The only thing I could figure was I was super curious about them. It held my interest for 5 to 7 years. I had access to places where I could study it. And I took a risk in wanting to learn and write about those things. And, nobody died. I don't have the kind of job where I worry about anybody dying if I don't do a good job. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a surgeon. So it's pretty easy, pretty safe, I guess. So
Okay.
that means I have to force myself to take those risks. And but I really think a lot of it boils down to how do you want to spend your time? And that question comes up when people retire, but I think we should be asking that all the time. I didn't ask myself that enough, I think,
Yeah.
long
Yeah.
ago.
So for people looking to identify that blue ocean, lean into something that you're curious about that can hold that attention,
Mhm.
then talk to the top dogs in that space and figure out what is happening and then what's not happening, and then let your curiosity lead you to the connection between those two.
Mhm. The question I used to ask all of them is, what keeps you up at night? And so that would give me insights into, if they don't have the answers for those things, can I help them by studying it and giving them some ideas? So I think if someone wants to find the blue ocean, some people don't. But if you want to do something that others don't, if you want to be out there on the edges and kind of breaking ground a little more, then absolutely figure out what's interesting, where the gaps are, and then talk to really good people. But then just talk to a wide variety. I think that's the key. Your podcast looks like the guests come from. They may be people that they are healers, they are coaches, but they come from a variety of fields and probably locations and backgrounds. And so it's that diversity in thinking that I force myself to learn about stuff I'm not interested in. I remember one night I'm a great question asker. You're doing a better job than I am right now, but some two men were talking about fantasy football. And I said, all right, what is this fantasy football? What is it all about? Well, we spent an hour. They were explaining it to me, arguing with each other about it all. I learned something. We had a good time. I was part of the conversation. Otherwise, I would have just had to stand there and listen. And I thought, that this is my goal, is to learn something new every day. So if it's fantasy football or bow hunting, I don't know if you have that in Texas, but bow hunting is big here, and things that I really am not interested in, but if it's interesting to another person, then there has to be something I can learn from it. So maybe that's too selfish, but anyway.
No, no, I love it. It's like a selfishness. I feel like it's really hard to be entirely selfless because part of me feels like we wouldn't even think about it if it didn't have some sort of incentive to us.
Yeah, you get it. You feel good. You're learning, whatever it might be.
Exactly.
I heard a question the other day. We use the what would you have told yourself when you were 30?
Yep.
What do you wish you'd known when you were 30? And they flipped it around. They were asking 30-year-olds, what do you wish your 60-year-old self knew? Or what do you wish your 60-year-old self had remembered? And I thought, whoa, what would your answer to that be? What is it you want your 60-year-old self to hold on to remember, to never lose, or to gain?
Yeah. I really like that. I like the remember question. What do you want your
Mhm.
60-year-old self to remember?
Right.
What would I want my 60-year-old self to remember? I think it would be how precious small day-to-day interactions are, and to like remember the precious moments. So like the little times when I'm being playful with Gracie, my wife, or
Uh-huh.
the conversations I had with friends about dreams and goals, and we were going after it, and there was so much energy in the room, or the times when I like humbled myself and listened, and that person really felt loved by that, and we were able to share that connection. Like just remember all those little things. I'm like, a lot of that has happened in the past 2 weeks, and right now I can't even remember them in detail. And I don't remember stuff from when I was like 14, 15, 16 in high school, you know?
Mm.
And so it's like to have my 60-year-old self have a vivid memory of the precious small little moments with friends, even if I'm not like extremely fond of them now, I know I would look back on them with a fondness. So
Do you write things down? Do you keep any kind of a notebook or a journal?
I do not.
I do and don't. It comes and goes, but I really do when I travel. Um I was looking back over one the other day, and just a short comment about an interaction that you had, that'll bring it back.
Yeah.
And so to put it down, and then it's there in your 2023 little notebook, so that 20 years from now you can say, oh yeah, I remember that little thing that happened. Little
Mhm.
I write a newspaper column irregularly for our local paper, and that's one that I just wrote about. It will publish on small gestures. You're talking about small moments of interaction, but I was struck by some small gestures that others did for me, unexpected, unneeded, really, but thoughtful. And maybe we don't see them or we don't acknowledge them. And so to capture some of those and say, wow, in this really tough life we're all living right now, what are the small things that we can do for another person? Um, and in your case, you're saying, what are the small moments I want to remember and never lose? So capture them now. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like the question, what do you want your 60-year-old self to remember? Because it makes me walk through my days with more intention. Like I'm like, if my 60-year-old self is gonna remember it, I need to journal some stuff. I need to be more present in the moment and soak it in now so it leaves an emotional
Mhm.
impression on me. And so it
Yeah,
makes an imprint on my brain.
right.
Yeah, that's a really
I,
good
I
question.
I just read something the other day. Somebody said, "Oh, I follow Cher's advice, the singer. It's how do you cope with a stressful world or something?" And she's apparently said, "If it won't matter in 5 years, it won't matter now." And I thought, "Oh, I love that." If it won't matter in 5 years, why let it bother you now? So that's sort of like your 60-year-old self. What are the things that you want to remember? And then as you look back, what do I need to do now to make sure that I'm the person I want to be in 60 years?
Yeah, for sure.
Not 60 years, when you're 60. Yeah, 20,
When you're
30,
60.
40. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really, it reminds me of this thing. Alex Hormozy, he's like just a big entrepreneur guy. And he said he had trouble with gratitude. And I've also really had trouble with gratitude in my life. And he was like, the way I was able to access gratitude, I wasn't able to think about something and feel grateful for it in the moment. But what I would do is I would visualize my 80-year-old self looking back on this second as if it's the last second I'm going to experience like this. Because your 80-year-old self has more perspective. You're only going to be 23 once. And
Mm-hmm.
so to cherish each day when you're 23 and be like, look around and you'll say, I remember when Austin was like this before AI was running the streets.
Yes.
I
Yes.
I remember when the trees were so beautiful and I was driving that Nissan Altima. I remember I remember
Yeah.
when me and my wife were figuring this out. I remember
Yeah.
my friends from this church. And so just to
Yeah.
like, I don't know, really cool. It brought me into the gratitude and I could feel it because
Yes.
you look back on it with a fondness. That's how you look back on it when you're 80 and you can do that right now. So
I think that's so true. And at your age, you don't have people getting ill and aging, or maybe you've got relatives, older relatives, but in the last year, and I don't know if it's not COVID because that's not what they've had, but and just in the last 2 weeks, one of our executive MBAs, a surgeon, very accomplished guy, uh, early 40s, had a stroke.
mm,
And I don't know if he's going to be okay. And I'm thinking 42 and you have a stroke. And I've several things like that have happened in the last, well, several months, I guess. And it just sort of takes you exactly what you're talking about. Live as though an hour from now you could have a stroke. And so that keeps you alive, it keeps you awake, keeps you present, it keeps you being grateful for being around the people you love, that sort of thing. And it sounds very cheesy, I think, until it starts happening to you and you see it around you, and you don't want to wait that long.
yeah.
So good for you for acknowledging and seeing that now. Great. It's really good.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate that for sure, for sure. I had one last thing I wanted to talk about, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. Um, did you say you were publishing or you were sending out stuff to be reviewed once per month?
In my academic career early on, yeah, probably the first 10 years I used to. First 5 or 7 or 8 years, yeah. Yeah, which
So
was hard, yeah.
that's a lot of production.
Well, now keep to be realistic, it wasn't 12 new things. So I might send something out and it came back in 4 months and I had to revise it. So it might be the same thing. It was probably 5 to 7 different pieces of work though.
So still once
Yeah,
every
so it
two
was a
months.
lot. Hmm?
Once about every 2 months, you had a new piece.
Average, yeah, probably 1 to 2, 3, yes. But remember also, it could be conference papers. It could be journals that were super difficult to get into and some that were less difficult. And so I tried to give myself a little leeway early on. It was the habit I was building. And so that's why I said my hit rate wasn't great. But it was the habit of just uh, get it out there. One early mentor said, if you do the research, write it up. If you write it up, send it out. If you send it out, get it published. So you might have to send it out more than once, but it was that sense of don't give up, be persistent, just keep the pipeline full, keep things going out constantly. And so it was really that habit of always being in production line mode. And I actually I was department chairman here a long time ago, and one professor who was absolutely brilliant, um, didn't publish. And I said, "What's going on here? You have a dissertation, you can write something from that." And he let me read it, and it was fantastic. I thought this was one of the best things I'd ever read. And I said, "What's going on here?" And he said, "Well, I sent out a manuscript and they rejected, or maybe it was even a revise and resubmit." And he said, "I was so crushed. I never sent anything out again." So he
Mm,
never was promoted. And so I said, I will work with you. I'll write with you. You have to take the lead and I will do everything I can to support you. And he didn't want to. So I didn't want to get in the mode of somebody says something negative and I'm crushed and I can't pick myself back up. So academics and I guess comedy, acting, there are so many times when people get rejected one way or another and they quit. And so that was my way of making sure that I didn't let people hurt me when they sent back, and sometimes it was pretty crushing reviews. And so again, another piece of advice, someone said, you get that back, you stick it in your desk and wait a week, pull it back out and then read it. And sure enough, I mean, you give yourself some recovery time. And so then I say, okay, they had a good point there. Well, I don't agree there, and I'll tell them why. And oh yeah, that's a good point. So it was really the habit. I'm huge on habits. I don't want to spend a lot of time recreating things. So if I can set a good habit up, and that was one, then I just do them.
Yeah, that's really what I wanted to ask you about. Talk to us about you already alluded to the mindset a little bit and why you set it up, but just the act of just the discipline and consistency behind that. Like, what was the daily routine like? And what did you do when you got to the point of like, I don't want to do this right now? How did you
Mm-hmm.
keep that discipline intact?
Mm-hmm. Um,
And we got about 4-ish minutes.
yeah, and it's I think a pretty simple answer. I had a weekly schedule where I think I was in the university 3 days a week, and I stayed home 2 days a week, and I worked on the weekends. This was before children, so my husband and I, and so I just those were the days that I stayed home and worked all day long. And and that was the pattern. My dad set this up. He was in the army for a long time, became a professor, and he would do that and did his master's and PhD in record time. And he said, you just have to go down and sit there and be there. And then he said, but when I block time off for play, I play. And so that's what we did. I would take all day Sunday or whatever it might be and not think about work, but just to know that this desk is waiting for me and nothing's going to be written unless I do it. And so that it is discipline. I am incredibly disciplined in life, except for exercise. I don't like exercise. So, but I'm very disciplined when it comes to work and other things. And so it was because it was such a habit and you just don't question it. If you wake up in the morning and say, gee, should I go sit at my desk and work on this fiction? Not today. No, I do it. Nobody's making me do it, but I do it just because I need that routine and discipline to be able to get something completed. I mean, how else do you do it? I'm slow on a lot of things, so I need to have that discipline and persistence.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I just need it. I know I need it. So I'm going to make my mind and body obey the fact that this is the routine, this
Yes.
is the
You
discipline.
just right. And once you get started, it's easier. The book, I'm sure, Atomic Habits.
Yep.
That's one of my favorites. So he does a good job on, okay, start small and then just keep doing it. And then you can add other things to it. So
Yeah. Big
yeah,
fan of Atomic Habits.
good, good. Me
Awesome.
too.
Well, Nancy, that's all we
Well,
got
thank
for you.
you. Thanks so much. This was really fun. Great questions. Really good
Yes.
questions.
Thanks for coming on the show. And if people want to know more about you, where do they find you?
I have a website called nancyknapier.com. So Nancy, initial K, Napier.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So they can find me there. And those would be the two main ones right now.
Sounds good. Well, if you guys are listening to this and you loved what Nancy had to say, make sure to check her out. All the links to do so will be down in the show notes. Thank you guys
Great.
for watching. We will see you on the next one. Oh, what's up?
I will also, you have my email. So that would be another good thing to include.
Great. We will also put that in the show notes.
Super.
We'll
Thank you so much.
of
It was
course, we'll see you
wonderful.
guys on the next one, and we're out.